This week on The Futurists, Dave Shapiro.
The previous industrial revolutions made human strength irrelevant. This revolution will make human intelligence irrelevant.
Welcome back to The Futurists. I've been talking for a while about sort of next generation economic thinking and organizing principles. You've heard me debate it with Rob on the show, the whole techno unemployment factor and things like that. And I've been increasingly interested in a content creator, and AI researcher and practitioner who I'm going to introduce you to. His name is Dave Shapiro, and I actually came across one of the first concepts I came across from Dave was this concept called the meaning economy. And I definitely want to get into that today. But he spent 20 years working on AI tech in Silicon Valley, and Dave Shapiro, welcome to The Futurists.
Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
Where are you actually based?
I am on the East Coast, so I'm in Raleigh, North Carolina. It's kind of the miniature Silicon Valley in the Research Triangle Park area.
Right. Yeah, I spent some time in Cary in North Carolina, so not far from you at all. If I'd only known, we could have caught up. But I haven't been in the States for a while. You have, of course, grown up in the AI space. So AI, although it's a really hot topic right now, you've been working on it for a while. What does this go back to? Were you working on expert systems type stuff, or was it the early machine learning applications, sort of post Hinton?
Yeah, I'm not quite that old school. I first got into what we now call deep learning back in about 2009. I was trying to build some deep neural networks with C++, and very quickly realized that I was in way over my head in terms of evolutionary algorithms and reward specification and that sort of thing. Fast forward to about 2015, that's when the current deep learning era really took off, and I started dipping my toes back into it. And then, of course, GPT-2, GPT-3, ChatGPT came out. That trend started about 5 years ago, and the rest is history. So that's my 20-second pitch of my experience with AI.
You talk a lot about sort of AI futures. Do you consider yourself a futurist?
I've certainly been in that space. I haven't usually given myself that title. On my business card, it says AI philosopher because I inevitably end up putting a lot of philosophy into what I'm working on.
I can see that.
And yeah, that came from actually my audience, because as I was talking about, how do you align AI? And the question becomes, well, what do you align AI to? And you can't answer that question without, dipping into ethics and philosophy and all sorts of other stuff.
Is there any particular school of philosophical thought that you're most aligned with?
The work that I have done the most on is a little bit of deontology and a little bit of teleology. So basically virtue ethics, which is what are the correct values to have in order to, approximate the future outcome that you want to have. So virtue ethics or deontology is what are the duties that you have, not necessarily the outcomes, because if you put the cart before the horse, the outcomes might not be what you expect, but you can control what you're doing in the near term. You can say, this is my decision framework for today, tomorrow, those sorts of things. So that's really kind of where I've focused on.
So it's interesting that you're sort of getting into the philosophy of the impact of AI in many ways, right? I would argue that philosophically, AI has to change humanity, right? It has to reframe the human experience for one simple reason that, with certainly artificial superintelligence, if we get to that point relatively quickly, which we assume with the current scaling and compression laws that are coming into place that's a possibility. But that the point where we're going to have to negotiate with artificial intelligence is something I'm fascinated by, because we are starting to see in some models, it appears currently, that we are starting to see some alignments, where AI is much less likely to go down sort of non-ethical and radical paths because it is. I'm referring to some recent research on this, but philosophically, How do you think AI is going to change humanity?
So one of the best models to approach this problem is to look at it through the lens of a complex adaptive system. So complex adaptive systems are where you have two systems that are reacting to each other. And so one example that everyone is familiar with is the stock market. Your beliefs about the stock market and everyone's beliefs about the stock market modify the stock market's behavior, such as, this price versus that price. And then the stock market's reaction causes a reaction. So you have this recursive reaction between each other. Another way of thinking about this is coevolution. And so as technology evolves, humanity is also evolving. Now, technology can evolve faster than us, at least at a genetic level. Our minds are flexible enough to continue to evolve relatively quickly. 200 years ago, most people were farmers. Today, we have office workers. We have not physically evolved that much, but our minds are already pretty flexible. So that complex adaptive system view is one of the best ways to understand how two very, very fluid systems can just recursively influence each other.
Yeah, I think this is sort of interesting because the framing that humans may not be, on the intelligence game at least, when an AI comes and it's going to have very compelling logic, I would assume. We can see that already in terms of chain of thought stuff and things like that. But like I imagine things like, for example, why are you guys using fossil fuels? Like look at the damage you've done to the environment, and it's just not logical. And so we're going to have to defend human philosophies or human decision making, at least in the past. And I mean, one of the things that I have real contention with in the AI stuff is the same concerns as Hinton's expressed recently, is that, you going to move further away from equality because you've got more and more wealth being concentrated, and, that sort of, it would seem to be also a demonstrable failure of the current system in terms of improving the quality of life of the species or getting us to, abilities to advance. I'm
Sure.
just riffing off the theme here, but
well, so one thing to keep in mind is wealth inequality has come in cycles throughout all of history. So this is my framework, is basically where I learn from history and I look at the data. Those are kind of the two primary ways that I use to understand what's happening and what's going to happen. There have been periods in not even the distant past, but in the recent past, within the last century or two, where wealth inequality was far worse than it is today.
of course,
And despite the concentration of power at the top, we found a way to rebalance the scales. And there's different theories as to how and why that happens. I just read the book Why Nations Fail, a great book that I highly recommend. One of the primary lessons from that book is inclusivity. And I don't mean like DEI, but I mean, giving more people the vote, creating governments that are more transparent and more accountable. These are all very, very well established principles. And honestly, I think that the technology, yes, there's always going to be a profit motive for people to capture more value. Who owns the data centers? Who owns the robots? Sure. At the same time, these technologies also intrinsically upend the current power structures, the current status quo, which is an opportunity to restructure things. And the restructuring is pretty much inevitable. You're going to have to adapt to these new systems. And one of the superpowers of AI is that it can read everything. I mean, you have a token window of some of these chatbots that have 2 million tokens. That's more text than most people read in a month, and it can do it repeatedly. So we can flatten the information landscape, because one of the primary ways that manipulation happens, particularly economic manipulation and political manipulation, is through information asymmetry. Well,
right.
If everyone has access to the same AIs and everyone can process the same amount of information, then information asymmetries, I'm not going to say they disappear, because there's always hidden information.
In fact, we're going to have information asymmetry with the AIs. That they're going to have more information, right?
Yeah, I mean, artificial intelligence models today already know more than any 10 people know. But I personally do not ascribe to like the idea that the AI has its own agenda, at least not in the same way that so an example is like Elon Musk builds an AI that wants to maximize Elon Musk's power, right? Of course, Musk wants more money. You don't become the richest person on the planet on accident. Likewise, China, America, whoever builds AIs, and they say, well, we want to make sure that the scales are tipped in our favor. Everyone is doing that, and everyone has always done that. AI is just another tool in that toolbox. So really, it's kind of a net. I don't want to say completely net neutral because the stakes are a little bit higher, but it's also intrinsically open source, which means company A versus company V versus company C, or nation A versus B versus C. We're all still kind of moving in lockstep, and this is one thing where we've never seen a new keystone technology like artificial intelligence develop this quickly and this democratically already. The fact that AI is basically intrinsically democratic, I think, is a fundamentally different paradigm than what we've seen in the past. For instance, the development of steam technology, electricity, internet saturation. We're not seeing that kind of asymmetry in development, and that I think is very, very different this time around.
Hmm. I mean, it does lead, let's talk about, challenging the status quo. If we're talking about healthcare systems, it's obvious that AI and gene therapy and a number of emerging technologies right now are going to displace the current systems of control and organizing for that sector. But some economies are going to embrace that shift more than others. For example, I could see China, for example, saying this is phenomenal. We're going to radically improve longevity and health span, and we're going to reduce the cost of healthcare by orders of magnitude. Let's go for it. I could see maybe Saudi doing the same, but I couldn't see necessarily the US being quite quite in a hurry to adapt to sort of a data-based driven healthcare system. Not only because of the structure of healthcare, the healthcare system in the US today, but even just on data privacy and data sharing concerns.
Sure. I mean, so first, to address that, developing nations usually do have an advantage in adopting new technologies faster, and that is because in many cases they're just more desperate for anything that can help. They're like, whatever raises the floor, whatever raises kind of the bottom bound, the lower bound, they'll take it. And so you actually often see the most cutting edge, and this is before generative AI and general intelligence. Even narrow AI systems were adopted in places like rural India and rural Africa long before they're being adopted here in America, because you have all kinds of regulatory hurdles and a lot of skepticism. And yes, the entrenched power structures usually do resist change because, and it's interesting because they usually resist change even at their own expense. This is something that they talk about quite in depth in Why Nations Fail, which is that the current power structure, so that's the hegemonic power of hospitals and insurance companies and stuff, they say, we don't care if we can make more money another way. We're invested in the current way that things are being done. Now, when you have a technology as compelling as artificial intelligence, the economies of it, the economics of it, just fundamentally break the current paradigm. One example is just the practice of medicine. It's already been demonstrated that ChatGPT, the current version, is better than most physicians when used correctly. It's also many orders of magnitude cheaper. You can also duplicate it ad infinitum. Now, it takes a little while because obviously, given regulatory hurdles and laws and all kinds of other things, at the same time, America has reinvented itself plenty of times in the past through a process called creative destruction. And creative destruction happens when a few things kind of combine. So number one, you need something that is newly created. That's the creative part. So there's a new technology, new approach, new paradigm, whatever, new banking system, new electrification. But then you also need the political willpower. So when you look through history, this is an example of one of the reasons that Teddy Roosevelt was elected was because he was a wrecking ball. He was a human wrecking ball. And people were fed up with the hegemonic power of the trusts or the monopolies. Well, we just did that again. We elected a human wrecking ball. Yeah, exactly. We elected Donald Trump and Elon Musk, and they are basically Trump.
Lord Emperor Doge. Yes.
Right. Yeah. Aimed him like a cannon and said, shoot at the government.
Yes.
That's what they're doing. Now, is it going to be, are we going to increase efficiency? Is a lot of stuff going to break? Absolutely. Usually these things are, it's kind of like when you're doing spring cleaning in your home, it gets messier before it gets cleaner. So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
the
Well,
trajectory we're
I
on right
guess
now.
that was expected at some point, whether it's going to be related to this type of movement from Elon and so
Yeah.
forth. And you could see that this is stimulated from their concerns about the debt cliff. Um,
Hmm.
but I'm not sure we're making significant enough progress towards that. But that's another angle. Let's talk about your methodology a little bit, Dave.
Sure.
In terms of your forecasting of this, when you start talking about the implications for this, or when you're advising this, and of course on your YouTube channel, you famously talk about the fact that you do a lot of thinking for your audience.
Yep.
So, tell me about what process or methodology you apply to that thinking process, and the way you absorb this information and learn.
Yeah. So, I mean, number one thing is history. Some people agree or disagree whether or not history repeat itself, but it always rhymes. One thing that is remarkably consistent across all of recorded history is human nature. Whether it's resisting change, there's basically nothing new under the sun. Every time there's a new technology, there is always existential anxiety about it. Stories about when the telephone first came out. Some people said we shouldn't put telephones in homes because that would make women extremely neurotic and dysfunctional. And it's like, okay. And there was a Frenchman who said, trains would never take off because the human body explodes when it goes over 20 miles per hour. Okay. They also said that we
Same
shouldn't
with the
have
sound
novels.
barrier. Yep.
What was that? Oh, yeah, exactly. Same with the sound barrier. They said we shouldn't have novels because that would cause the moral decay of society. That was the Victorians.
Oh, what
There's
about the
always,
wireless radio? That was going to be a great cause of moral
oh yeah,
turpitude.
and based on the moral frame from before, then certainly yes. Like we now have two directional wireless communication in the form of 4G and 5G and Wi-Fi and internet and Starlink, and it conveys a lot of porn and other stuff that people would find morally reprehensible that we don't really care about anymore. It's just become normalized. So yeah, the moral panic and existential panic, none of that is new. So that's just one example of just learning from history. It's also, as my wife taught me and pointed out, is history is never linear. In the grand arc of history, yes, you can say, well, humans, we invented stone. We never uninvented stone tools. We invented, copper and bronze. We never really uninvented that. We invented steel, coal powered, and so on and so forth. But that's when you take a really big step back. When you zoom in, you often have these fits and starts where things are invented and then they're either misused or suppressed. One example that came from that book, Why Nations Fail, was that the Ottoman Turks suppressed the printing press for about 2 centuries. And there's a reason that, Turkey basically fell behind, why the Ottomans fell behind their Western peers around, about 100 years ago. So when you suppress those technologies, but that's a local perturbation
Yeah,
of
I mean,
that
we
larger
saw it
history.
with, of course, Islamic world of the 13th and 14th century were
Hmm.
coming up with phenomenal
Yep.
scientific innovations and math and other things, and then of course we saw some oppression of that.
Yep.
Listen, at this stage, before we go to a break, we like to do a little thing we call the quick fire round,
Okay.
Dave. So just getting a bit more information about you and AI, your AI upbringing. So let's do the lightning round. What was the first science fiction you remember being exposed to on TV or via books? Or you could apply it to AI if you wish.
Yeah. I grew up watching Star Trek Next Generation with my dad. So one of the very first images I remember was seeing Hugh the Borg, and I was just completely
Yeah.
transfixed by that.
There you go. We are the Borg. I am the Borg. Didn't he
There we
say
go.
that? Anyway, there you go. What technology do you think has most changed humanity?
In the grand scheme of things, I would say paper and the printing press by a long shot. That shattered empires, broke religious hegemony, changed the church, allowed for democracy to emerge. Yeah, paper and the printing press by far.
Very cool. Is there someone that has been a specific influence in terms of your career and your role as an AI philosopher?
Yeah, I would say Ray Kurzweil is probably the best, and that's just because he was an inventor, but also he trusts the data. Pretty much every prediction that he's made is based on data and long-term trends, and that's the second part of his history and data. You combine those two, that's how I do what I do.
Awesome. And the last question, what science fiction story or depiction of the future is most representative of the future you hope for?
The novel that I've written, and it's a series, Heavy Silver. So one of the key themes that I made or that I used when making that story was, what is it like if we actually succeed? So I have a planet in that world that is basically kind of how I think that things are going to go here on Earth.
All right, well, we'll have to check that out. And also, if you're interested in the book that Dave was talking about, Why Nations Fail, then you can check that out, of course, on Amazon. And the authors, you mentioned their name before, Dave.
I do not recall.
S Moglu.
Yep.
I messed that up for sure. But anyway, let's go to a quick break. You're listening to The Futurist. We're with Dave Shapiro. We'll be right back after these words from our kind sponsors. Provoke Media is proud to sponsor, produce, and support the Futurist podcast. Provoke.fm is a global podcast network and content creation company with the world's leading fintech podcast and radio show, Breaking Banks. And of course, its spin-off podcast, Breaking Banks Europe, Breaking Banks Asia Pacific. But we also produce the official Finovate podcast, Tech on Reg, and Emerge Everywhere, the podcast of the Financial Health Network. For information about all our podcasts, go to provoke.fm or check out Breaking Banks, the world's #1 fintech podcast and radio show. Welcome back to The Futurists. I have Dave Shapiro in the hot chair today, and we are talking about the philosophy of AI, amongst other things. Dave, before the break, we were talking a lot about the changing human systems and how human systems have changed in the past, being influenced by technologies and so forth. What do you think is materially different this time about artificial intelligence, or this time that we're living in? Why shouldn't we just say, look, it's just another tech? We've seen this stuff before. We will adapt. For every job we're going to lose to AI, we'll create new jobs. Why is it different this time?
Yeah, so I'll quote Geoffrey Hinton, and I'm probably misquote him a little bit, but he said something along the lines of, the previous industrial revolutions made human strength irrelevant. This revolution will make human intelligence irrelevant. That's really what it comes down to, is we are heading towards a period of what I call cognitive hyperabundance, which basically means that intelligence, or a scarcity of intelligence, will not be a constraint on anything that humans want to do. So, you won't need to hire a PhD or a postdoc to do research. Well, you pretty much already don't need to do that, depending on what kind of research you're doing. And as time progresses, as this technology saturates the market and saturates the world and universities, we're basically going to be achieving hundreds, thousands, millions of years worth of human level research every single day. Already that factor has been accelerated by quite a bit with tools like OpenAI's Deep Research, which does basically about a week's worth of human research in 5 minutes. So we're already kind of hitting that acceleration point where any kind of field research, or not field research, but research papers that you need, you can get it on demand. And this has many knock-on effects for literally every other science, whether it's medical science, material science, computer science, cryptography, whatever. And so
it will have to accelerate things, right? It has to. It has to result in an acceleration of our ability to apply intelligence,
Exactly. Yeah. And so this is where I talk about using data. You say, okay, how many man hours does this save? And another way of saying how many does it save, it's how much more does it give you? because this came from my background in information technology and automation. Was, what I would do is I'd automate some of my job, and okay, I automated this thing and it gives me back 5 hours a week, and that gives me 5 additional hours to do more automation, and then I could automate 40 hours a week. And by the end of my corporate career, I was doing about 200 hours worth of work per week in a 40-hour week, and I wasn't doing anything. I was just maintaining the machines that were doing the automation. So you turn that up to 11 because now everyone has that capability. That's the trajectory that we're on.
Well, I mean, we even see our friends Sam Altman and co making bets on the first, a single solopreneur or single person company to become a unicorn, which sort of shows you where AI practitioners in general are thinking, or at least where the industry is going. But that brings us to this sort of question of what are we going to do if we have such incredible autonomous capability in the economy that takes all the meaningless jobs out of the fray and allows us the time to pursue, what are humans going to do if we're not going to do the 9-to-5 factory jobs, the consulting jobs that are, being replaced by deep research, et cetera?
Yeah. Well, there's the concept that, you mentioned at the beginning, the meaning economy. And the way that I came up with that idea, and to be fair, I'm not the only person working in this space, but the specific methodology that I use to define this concept is, okay, instead of looking at the supply side, the labor supply side, which is what is it that humans can offer the economy? What is it that the market wants from humans? I looked at on the other side, which is the demand side, which is, in what cases will a human prefer another human? So where will you pay to have a human, interact with you? One example could be, you go to the coffee shop and you want to interact with a real human barista, so you go to the coffee shop that employs a real human rather than a robot. Or you go to the bakery where you know the baker and he's a real person or she is a real person. Even if they have robots helping in the back, you want that personal relationship. That's just a couple of examples. But you can expand that to like the job that we're doing here, where due to the way that human brains work, we have parasocial relationships where someone says, okay, yes, the AI could give me the cold, hard facts, but I want to know what that other person thinks. We're just biologically wired to care what other people think and say and do. And so that is really kind of the core thesis of the meaning economy, which is, okay, whether or not the rest of the capital economy works that way, what most you and I care about, and we already see this in young people today, because what do they care about? They all want to be influencers. They all want to be Twitch streamers. They want to be, TikTok stars and so on and so forth. They don't really care about, real economic productivity. That's just what they care about. And so you look at what starts at the human level. What is it that the human wants to consume or interact with? And that's really kind of the basis of what we can do on an economic level. Now, beyond that, I've been working on a metaphor of the river versus the garden, which is, up until now, we've lived life like a river, where you're just, you're following a well-cut path, rapidly going from one place to another, and everyone's life ends the same out in the ocean. That's, dying, basically. But if we solve that problem of dying, and we also don't have to rush from one thing to another, get an education, get a good job, buy a house, raise a family, saving up for retirement.
For your retirement, yeah.
Right. All of that goes out the window. So then you need an entirely different metaphor for how to orient towards life. And the metaphor that I use is it's a garden. And so I do a lot of writing, just as an example. I do a lot of writing, and what switched for me, I'm getting chills just thinking about this, what switched for me is the goal of writing is not to publish books or to publish blog posts. It's the act of writing itself is actually what I enjoy. I don't know if what I'm going to publish. I don't know if anything is going to get to that point. But I have a bunch of different projects and I'm cultivating them like, you might cultivate tomato plants and, cucumbers and whatever else. And so by orienting towards life like a garden rather than a river, everything takes the time that it takes.
Well, and time
and you enjoy the process.
Time and money are no longer constraints in the system because of the high levels of automation and because of longevity treatments and scientific advances, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Or it's not that they're not constraints. It's that we don't put pressure to force to overcome that constraint.
Right.
Because you always have a finite amount of time and money, but you say, rather than trying to rush to the end, let me just take care of all these little areas as we go.
Now, you have talked about technology unemployment and how these sort of automation changes will affect the workforce. But I understand that you have sort of come up with four major categories of work that humans will do in the meaning economy. Can you go over those?
Let's see. It always kind of changes. So one is like clerical work, or what I call statutory jobs. So those are jobs that you legally require someone to have a human doing. So for now, for instance, politics, we don't contemplate handing the reins over to robots. So if you want a judge or you want a president or a legislator or whatever, by definition, it has to be a human. There might be other kinds of statutory jobs that we have, like you might say, well, we still want human doctors, but we want the human doctors to be empowered with AI and robots. Personally, I think that we should probably get rid of human doctors in the long run.
Yeah.
But that's just an example. Lawyers, doctors, whatever. So statutory jobs is one category. Another one is sentimental jobs, or sentimental jobs is a good enough name for it, which is basically kind of those jobs that I was talking about, like the barista, the coffee shop owner, or the baker, where just for the sake of just human connection, you just want someone, just for the fact that your nervous system has evolved to orient towards other humans. Same thing like when you take your dogs to the dog park. We have a couple of dogs and we're going to go to the dog park after this interview. The dogs just light up when there's in a field with other dogs, right? Humans, we are not that much different. We like interacting with other humans. And then there's going to be more experiential jobs. So an experiential job is the kind of job where it's like a tour guide or a massage therapist or a music performance or that sort of thing, where again, it's what you're actually paying a premium for is having that human experience. So an example is you go to a yoga retreat or a meditation retreat. You probably don't want a robot teaching yoga and meditation, even if it can hypothetically do it, just because it doesn't mean the same thing if it's unless it's a human doing it. And then the fourth category, like I said, these categories kind of evolve, but is going to be more local stuff. So when I say local stuff, I mean local trades or farming or even ownership. Like I don't think that ownership is going to go away. So like I live in a somewhat rural area and there's a few local farms, and so those kinds of like salt of the earth kinds of things, I think are also probably going to stay for the foreseeable future. Now, will there be new kinds of jobs? Absolutely. Like I mentioned earlier, influencers, that sort of stuff, those aren't going away at all. Those are kind of, I would classify those more as sentimental jobs, which is just, you're a human, I'm a human, I want to hear from humans, right? That's human sentiment.
I mean, I've argued that in fact I've quoted you on the meaning economy and those four types of jobs in presentations I've done in the future. But the one I would add, which I think is going to be an overwhelming category of work for a period of time, will be assisted by some fairly sophisticated technologies as well, but is climate mitigation and climate response. I think that is going to be so overwhelming. I think that's ultimately what's going to break the economic model that we operate the system on today, because at some point the loss of life and the loss of property will be so great that the numbers will no longer make any sense. So that the question that we would ask today, which is, well, how are we going to pay for all of that stuff, becomes meaningless, because the threat to a large enough group of people is significant enough that we have to throw that constraint out the window, as we have done in the past in like the Second World War, mobilization, and times like that, right? But I mean, that's just riffing on the theme. What do you think? How do you think climate might play into this in terms of the meaning space?
Yeah. So one thing to keep in mind is that climate change, while it is definitely happening and is certainly represents a major threat to geopolitical stability, it's kind of a slow motion train wreck,
Sure.
and humans. The reason that humans orient to the world the way that we do is because we think locally and geometrically, which means if you can see it happening, then it's real. Unless you, and so this is like an example, if you're driving a car down the road, everything is far apart, but everything is changing relative to your perspective fast enough that it makes sense. If you're just standing on a road, everything looks way bigger than it does when you're actually driving. And so it's a matter of rate of change. And so this is another reason why I'm not particularly concerned about AI safety, is because people trust their intuition to say AI is going to kill everyone. It's like your limbic system is not calibrated to understand artificial intelligence. Likewise, your limbic system is not calibrated to understand climate change, because it's a global and exponential thing. Now, specifically, though, what I anticipate will happen is that artificial intelligence is actually, when I refer to it as a keystone technology, here's another example of what I mean, is that artificial intelligence is so power hungry, the best way to feed that is not through burning more fossil fuels. It's through creating energy hyperabundance through renewables and nuclear.
Yeah.
And so I think that it's kind of a two birds with one stone kind of argument with artificial intelligence, which is we need to give it a huge amount of cheap power. You're not going to do that by drilling more oil or digging up more coal. The best way to do that is to start harvesting solar, which, by the way, the cost of solar is dropping exponentially. Solar production is going up exponentially. So this
We
might
just
as
had
well.
Pablos. Yeah, we just had Pablos Holman on the other week talking about beaming microwave solar energy, from Lagrange points and stuff like that. So,
Sure.
and putting solar farms in space for that. And because of the lower cost to orbit now, those systems are becoming rapidly feasible. So,
Exactly.
I don't think solving the energy problem is going to be a big leap for us technologically. We have to get some better battery tech maybe, but again, China's making some leaps and bounds there. Fusion will come online, next generation, nuclear, like molten salt reactors, stuff like that. There seems to be tons of potential for solving that problem in particular.
Sure. Right. And the reason that I bring up power is because climate change is fundamentally an energy problem. It is also a material science problem, but like, for instance, if you want to sequester carbon, that's primarily an energy intensive problem. If you want to decarbonize our economy, you need better sources of energy. So this is where I always return to data is, what is the first principle here? Why did we cause climate change in the first place? It was because of the energy sources we were exploiting.
Sure.
And so, well, if you want to decarbonize, it's kind of there's a survivalist problem. It's given different names, but it's the down climbing trap, which is if you're up on a mountain and you want to get off the mountain, it's much easier to climb down because gravity is working with you. But you might get to a point where you can't climb down any further, so then you're stuck. And you can't climb back up because it's easier to go down, and you can't jump off the cliff because you'll die. And so that's kind of where we're at. We're at the down climbing problem of decarbonization, where we want to decarbonize, but we don't have that ladder. And this is where
definitely can't jump off the carbon cliff so quickly, right?
Well, because this is an argument that people don't really make anymore. But a couple of years ago, people were saying, "Why don't we just shut off the fossil fuels?" I was like, because then half the planet starves to death because agriculture shuts down, because logistics shut down.
But if we had enough incentive to change that system, we could. That's, I think, the point, right?
Oh, the system is changing. It's already changing.
It is. No. As you say, the cost of solar is a great illustration of that. All right, let's get a bit sci-fi, dude.
Sure.
We're going to wrap up. So I want to get sci-fi here and take us out to, I don't know, the 2050s or beyond, and tell us how you think this is all going to mesh out. What is the world going to be like? How a philosophy is going to be different in 30 or 40 years?
Yeah, well, from the daily day-to-day experience, I think one of the biggest differences is there's not going to be any old people, and not because old people are going to die, but because we're going to have solved rejuvenation probably within the next 10 years, certainly within the next 20 to 30 years, which means that you're going to have no geriatric care because it's going to have been made it completely irrelevant. And then some of the other things is, of course, the idea of going to an office or going to a 9-to-5 job. Certainly there will still be some people, entrepreneurs, business owners, politicians who work in offices. But the idea of the suburb clustering around a city so that everyone can work a stone's throw away from a corporate office job, that's going to completely go away in the same way that
Jamie Dimon and Elon Musk are not going to be happy to hear that, bro.
Well, Elon Musk is
kidding.
also the same guy who said that you should get robots to raise your children so that you can go be more productive instead of the other way around, which is using the robots to be productive so you can raise your children. So maybe take Elon Musk with a grain of salt on some of those more human issues. So those are going to be the primary differences of lived experience. Another big difference is this is something that I'm living through right now because I'm kind of already living in that space. Is nobody is available to do stuff during the day. Everyone, all of my friends, that are local to me, they have day jobs, and I'm like, come on, guys, let's go do stuff. And they're like, well, we can do stuff at night. And it's like, but I wake up at 5 a.m, so I can start doing stuff early. So our day-to-day lives are just going to be very, very different in terms of how you live. We already have plenty of models from that, from retirement communities, but also leisure classes throughout history, from the ancient Greeks and Romans to the Victorians. People find plenty of ways to fill their days, whether it's dinner parties or exercise or whatever. The Spartans, they were all hunters and warriors. Not saying that everyone's going to do that, but just saying that whenever you have a class of people, and this is going to be most people very soon here, whenever you have a class of people who don't have an occupation, they always find ways to fill their days. The Athenians did it with politics, and there's plenty of armchair politics on the internet already.
Yeah, we could travel the solar system, etc. What about the economics and the politics? Where do you see that going?
This could be. I could see a couple potential outcomes. Number one, on a hypothetical level, you don't need human politicians. If we figure out blockchain and artificial intelligence as a coordination mechanism, because you have to ask yourself, what's the purpose of government? Purpose of government is, resource allocation and maintaining peace and stability and a few other things, property law and those sorts of things. Is there any intrinsic need for a human to do those jobs? Because if the purpose of government is to coordinate a society, we can invent technologies that are better at coordinating societies than elected representatives.
And more resource efficient, right?
Absolutely more resource efficient. Consider that our current political paradigm was invented when we were still agrarian, right? With agrarian level philosophy and agrarian level technology, when like a horse-based postal service was the fastest way to communicate. That's when America was invented. Right. So I think it's time for an operating system upgrade.
Yes.
Now, the thing is, there's been plenty of people who have proposed that, the Marxists, the Chinese, the Russians, so on. And when you try and make changes too fast, usually a lot of people die. And so I do not advocate the burn it all down and start from scratch very quickly, because that level of chaos at a national level is not sustainable. At the same time, we do see an opportunity to completely rehabilitate the way that we coordinate society.
Interesting. Well, on that note, we've really enjoyed having you on the show, dude. It was a great conversation. Certainly something I enjoy getting into personally. So thank you for coming on. How do people stay in touch with you and tell us a bit more about the YouTube channel and your books and where they can find that stuff?
Yeah, so everything that I do is up on Linktree. It's Linktree/Dave Shap. I have 5 YouTube channels plus another podcast that I co-host. I've got a Substack article or Substack blog up there that I write on very regularly. So I'm all over the place. I also have a Patreon community with a Discord server and a AI learning community called New Era Pathfinders. It's all available on my personal site up on Linktree.
Awesome. You are ubiquitous, as we would say. Well done.
Be
it's great
everywhere.
to have you on.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, listen, stay in touch. If you get a new book launch or something like that you want us to give some love to, let us know. But we've really enjoyed having you on the show.
Thank you. Take care.
That's it for the Futurists this week, guys. And as per usual, thanks to the team at Provoke Media for helping put this together and get this out there. And you know the drill. We'll see you in the future.
Well, that's it for the Futurists this week. If you like the show, we sure hope you did. Please subscribe and share it with the people in your community. And don't forget to leave us a 5-star review. That really helps other people find the show. And you can ping us anytime on Instagram and Twitter at Futurist Podcast for the folks that you'd like to see on the show or the questions that you'd like us to ask. Thanks for joining. And as always, we'll see you in the future.